Jural barked a command in his native tongue, sharp and guttural. The cub jerked upright, tail stiff, shoulders locked. And then just as quickly it sagged. Not from disobedience, from something worse, surrender. Daniel didn't realize he'd stopped in the middle of the path until a Silithi cadet hissed at him to move. That night, as lights dimmed across the training quarters, Daniel sat on the edge of his bunk, trying to work the stiffness out of his knee. Every movement made him wince. He pressed a gel pack to his side, the skin still warm from the bruise, and listened to the quiet murmurs filtering through the walls. The Torkathi cub and Commander Jural were stationed just 3 units down. At lights out, a muffled thud echoed through the corridor. Then another. He didn't sleep. Over the next 4 days, the cub said nothing. It had no name anyone used aloud. Just the combat trainee. It completed the obstacle courses, navigated terrain drills, and ran silent attack simulations with an eerie kind of mechanical grace. But it never made eye contact. Never made a sound. Jural, however, did. He shouted. Constantly. Sometimes commands, sometimes insults Daniel couldn't translate but understood all the same. Once, in the early morning, Daniel saw Jural holding the cub down by its throat while it trembled. No one intervened. Because, officially, it was conditioning. Daniel thought of his dog growing up, the way it would crawl under the porch after a thunderstorm and shake for hours. The first time Daniel offered the cub a protein bar, it flinched so hard it backed into the wall. Eyes wide, ears flat. He didn't approach, just unwrapped the bar and tossed it halfway between them, then sat cross-legged with his arms on his knees. The cub crept forward only after Daniel looked away. After that, it would sometimes pause when Daniel was nearby. Not look at him, but stop moving. Breathe slower. Watch from the corner of its eye. That was enough. The 6th day began with a live fire drill. Dozens of cadets gathered in the sun-scorched valley basin, while instructors demonstrated tactics for tracking and neutralizing high-threat targets. A Torkathi war doctrine display was the centerpiece. Jural led it, of course. The cub was the live asset. Its role is to evade and resist, Jural announced to the assembled crowd, voice laced with command. Observe. This is discipline. The cub was released at the far end of the field. It hesitated just slightly, then bolted, fast as lightning, weaving through sparse foliage with predatory grace. Daniel watched, heart hammering. Jural gave chase, faster than someone his size should have been able to move. A training stun spear in hand. The cub doubled back, dodged left, climbed over a boulder, and froze. Jural was there, spear raised. He struck. The blow wasn't for show. It landed across the cub's back with an audible crack. The young creature screamed. It collapsed. And then, trembling, tried to rise. Jural struck again. Stand! Fight! The cub's limbs gave out. It whimpered. The second cry was quieter. Jural raised the spear a 3rd time. The crowd held its breath. Daniel shouted something he didn't know what. Just noise. The spear came down. But the cub moved. It sprang up in one motion faster than should have been possible. The tip of its claws caught Jural square in the jaw. The sound was sickening, like wet stone cracking under pressure. Jural's body folded backward, collapsing to the dirt. Silence. The cub looked around wildly, eyes wide, teeth bared, blood dripped from its claws. And then slowly it turned. It walked, 1 step at a time, back across the field. Not toward the trees. Not toward the shuttle. Toward Daniel. No one moved. The cub reached him, sat heavily at his feet, then pressed its body into his legs and curled like it was trying to disappear. Daniel didn't breathe. He didn't dare. 4 minutes passed before medics dared step onto the field. They didn't approach Daniel. They went to Jural, who was still breathing but unconscious. His lower jaw was destroyed. Cartilage, bone, tendon, all shattered. Blood pooled on the ground. The cub remained where it was, pressed into Daniel's lap. When he shifted slightly just to adjust his foot, it tensed, whimpered. So he stopped moving. Hours passed. A temporary shelter was erected around them. Command ordered a lockdown of the training perimeter. External comms were sealed. No one left, no one came in. Daniel's legs went numb, his pulse never stopped racing. Still, the cub didn't move. He felt it trembling. And for the first time since arriving on Zirkesh 9, he realized it wasn't a monster. It was just a child. And someone had taught it to fear the world. By the third hour, Daniel could no longer feel anything from the waist down. His boots had disappeared beneath the cub's massive frame, its weight steadily pressing into his thighs like a warm, shivering boulder. The creature hadn't budged since curling into him, and Daniel hadn't dared shift again, not even when a pair of alien medics circled at a distance with tranquilizers in hand. "Don't," he'd whispered hoarsely when one of them edged closer. "You'll make it panic." Neither medic responded. They just exchanged glances, adjusted the dosage on their injectors, and backed off a few paces, still watching, still calculating. Above them, drones hovered silently, lenses trained on the unlikely tableau in the middle of the scorched field. One unconscious Torcathi officer, one human cadet, stiff as a statue, and one apex predator nestled against him like an overgrown house cat in crisis. At some point, a canopy structure went up around them, white, sterile, and wind-proof. Inside, heat lamps flickered on, warming the stale air. A tray of hydration packs and rations was quietly slid inside. The cub didn't respond to any of it. Neither did Daniel. He was too busy trying not to pass out. 4 hours after the strike, a panel of command officials arrived in a drop shuttle. Daniel didn't recognize all of them, but he knew their types' uniforms with different crests, eyes older than he'd ever feel, the sort who had been in enough wars to know that nothing was ever just a misunderstanding. These were people who decided whether accidents were accidents or court-martial offenses. The one who spoke first was a Bashari, pale, amphibious, dressed in layered robes. "Cadet Hayes," she said from the doorway, "you're free to move." Daniel glanced down at the cub. Its eyes were open now, glowing faintly, watching. He said nothing. The Bashari took a slow step forward. "We've sedatives that won't harm it. We only want to transfer you." "No," Daniel said, his voice barely audible. "Not yet. You're not a hostage, son. The cub has bonded to you. That doesn't mean you need to stay like this." Daniel pressed a palm lightly against the creature's shoulder. Its breathing hitched. "You'll spook it if you try anything," he muttered. "It's scared out of its mind." A sigh. "We have behavioral experts from 3 species on standby. We need to run tests. It could be imprinted. We don't know what this is yet." "I know what it isn't," Daniel said. "It's not violent, not unless it's pushed." The silence that followed wasn't agreement, but it wasn't denial either. Eventually, they left him alone again. By the end of the first day, Jural was undergoing emergency maxillofacial reconstruction aboard the Accord medical ship Kesser. Reports filtered back quietly: triple fractures along the mandible, shattered zygomatic arch, extensive soft tissue trauma. Recovery was estimated at 4 to 5 months minimum. He had been placed in a medically induced coma to stabilize swelling in the cranial nerves. Daniel only half heard the details. The cub hadn't moved in hours, but now, as twilight deepened and the temperature dropped, it finally shifted. It lifted its head, sniffed. Then, without warning, it began to lick Daniel's wrist where his pulse thudded against the skin. He flinched. It tensed again, drew back. The wide pupils made it look like a baby animal caught somewhere between curiosity and terror. "It's okay," Daniel whispered, voice cracking. "It's all right." A tray near his side held a sealed protein slurry pack. He reached for it slowly, agonizingly slow. When he tore the tab open and offered it, the cub stared at him for several seconds before leaning forward. It drank. Then slumped again, heavier this time, breathing a little slower. That night, a cot was quietly set up inside the enclosure. Medical staff offered to bring Daniel to it while they distracted the cub. He declined. Instead, he sat through the night with his back against the support pole, the cub's head in his lap, and his body aching like someone had run him through a full contact wall. Twice. He didn't sleep. On the second day, the analysts came. Not with machines, not yet, but with notebooks, scanners, soft-voiced questions. They didn't try to separate them, not anymore. That part had become obvious. The cub wouldn't allow it. It had growled when they brought in a behavioral tech from the Yilin Federation who got too close. The same tech nearly wet himself and requested reassignment. Daniel spent most of that morning answering questions. Did you offer it anything prior to the incident? Have you trained with animals before? Any trauma in your medical records we should know about? Is there a reason your scent markers might be unusually compatible? I don't know, Daniel said, over and over. I just didn't hit it. Later that day, a second set of questions began, sharper, less curious. How do you feel about Commander Jurl? Were you aware of the Torkathi training methods? Do you believe the cub acted in self-defense? He paused at that one. Then, yes, absolutely. A long silence. One of the Andaran diplomats folded her claws. That conclusion carries diplomatic weight, cadet. You're implicating a senior officer. Daniel shrugged, or tried to. His back cracked like dry twigs. Then maybe someone should have stopped him before it got this far. By the third day, the cub had started following Daniel when he moved. He couldn't get far. He had nerve compression in both legs, minor dehydration, and a strained ligament in his hip that made walking a waddle-limp hybrid. But the cub never let more than 2 feet come between them. When he limped to the latrine unit, it waited outside. When he tried to take a nap on the cot, it curled underneath it like a shadow with teeth. At one point, someone tossed a ball near them, testing reflexes, maybe. The cub leapt forward, jaws flashing. The ball was shredded mid-air. Then the cub dropped it, tail low, and padded back to Daniel's side. I think it's scared it'll be punished if it doesn't return, Daniel muttered. Dr. Lorenze, one of the xenopsychologists assigned to observe, wrote furiously on her tablet. On day 5, the inquiry into Commander Jurl's conduct was made public, not to the galactic press, but to the cohort and command staff. Several junior officers had provided testimony under oath. Hidden footage confirmed their statements. The cub had been subjected to progressive sensory deprivation, isolation in a soundless box for up to 10 hours a day, food withheld as punishment, and repeated shock conditioning. Jurl had called it discipline forging. Daniel read the logs in stunned silence. Each entry made his stomach twist. When he looked down, the cub was staring up at him. By the 7th day, Jurl was officially stripped of command. Pending trial. His rank was frozen, his pension contested. The Torkathi delegation went silent. Several of them had already left Zerkesh 9. Others remained watching Daniel like he'd committed the sin, not their own. He started carrying ration packs in his pockets, handing them to the cub before each exercise. It accepted them calmly now. Didn't flinch when he raised his voice, still hated loud noises. Still panicked if someone shouted behind it. But sometimes, when Daniel sat on the ground with his arms wrapped around his knees, the cub would lean against him with all its weight and sigh. A soft, low sound, tired, but not afraid. The official announcement came on the 8th day. Daniel Hayes, human cadet, was to be assigned as the temporary guardian of the Torkathi cub, pending behavioral stabilization and further evaluation. For observation purposes, the document said. Daniel knew what that really meant. No one else could get near it. So he nodded and packed his gear. Because whatever this was imprinting, trauma bonding, survival instinct, it didn't change the fact that a creature born to kill had chosen of its own volition to curl up in his lap the moment it finally fought back. And now? It wouldn't leave. The new quarters weren't spacious, a single room carved into the South Plateau, reinforced with alloy lattice and soft lit from above to mimic sunrise cycles. Daniel was issued a fold-down cot, a field desk with built-in sanitation tools, and a basic food prep unit tuned to both human and Torkathi-compatible nutrition packs. The cub had a corner mat thick enough for a creature twice its size. It ignored it completely. Instead, it lay under the desk, pressed against Daniel's boots. Every time he moved, it moved too. Even at night. The first few times he rolled onto his side while half asleep, he'd feel the heavy thump of a paw or hear the soft rumble of breath against the side of the cot. He once turned over and found the cub standing beside the bed, just watching, not blinking. It should have been terrifying. But it wasn't. More like being followed around by a silent, massive toddler who was permanently convinced the ceiling might fall in unless Daniel stayed visible. By the second morning in their shared quarters, Daniel gave up on trying to close the cub off from anything. It had scratched straight through one of the alloy panel dividers anyway. He kept a strict routine: morning walk, 2 basic drills in open terrain, afternoon rest and behavioral review, evening meal, lights off at cycle dim. It wasn't optional. Recovery from a pinched nerve and damaged hip ligament demanded strict pacing, slow walks, controlled motion, alternating heat and cold. The med team checked in every other day to ensure his gait wasn't regressing. When they tried to examine the cub, it growled. Only Daniel could get close enough to inspect the fur near its spine, still mottled where bruising had turned the skin dark weeks ago. He checked daily. No swelling, no heat. Just twitching skin and tense muscles anytime he touched too close to its back legs. Likely connective tissue trauma, said the station's physiomed over comms. Might be weeks before we can conduct a proper scan. Daniel nodded. He didn't say that the cub had started jerking in its sleep. Little spasms, every third night, and sometimes quiet yelps. He just lay awake when it happened, pretending not to notice. The 6th time the cub hesitated to go outside, Daniel sat cross-legged by the entrance and waited. "You don't have to," he said quietly. "But I'm going out there." The cub stared, unmoving. So he stood, limped out into the early haze alone. He made it to the rock ridge before hearing claws behind him. It walked beside him after that. Every time. A week after the reassignment, Command sent in the culture specialists. 3 of them, a diplomat, a socio-behaviorist, and most surprisingly, a Torkathi. The Torkathi officer was young, no more than 30 cycles, and bore none of the hard muscle lines common to the warrior class. His posture was neutral, but his eyes never left the cub. He didn't speak for a long time. Finally, he said, "You're not restraining it." Daniel looked up from where he sat, adjusting a wrist bandage he'd been scratching again. "Why would I? It's bred to kill, you know this." "It hasn't tried. Yet." The cub, resting under the cot, blinked once, then yawned. The Torkathi narrowed his eyes. "You're not afraid?" Daniel hesitated. "I was," he admitted. "Still am, sometimes." "Then why keep it near you?" Daniel looked down at the cub again. Its tail thumped once against the floor. "Because someone taught it that everyone else is pain, and if I'm the first one who isn't, maybe that means something." The Torkathi said nothing. But when he left, he didn't look as sure of himself anymore. 3 days later, a petition began circulating. Several cadets and species delegates, including 2 from the Ozhari contingent, formally requested the cub be removed from Zirkesh 9. The reasons listed were security threat, psychological disruption, and risk of interspecies destabilization. Daniel read the copy delivered to his room. He knew half the names. One of them, Varric, a Trailan scout, had shared rations with him just a week ago. He didn't get angry. He just folded the petition and dropped it in the waste bin. Later that day, Daniel sat on the ridge again, arms around his knees. The cub beside him watched the wind whip red dust across the plain below. "You know," Daniel murmured, "I used to be scared of dogs as a kid." The cub didn't respond, but its ears flicked once. Big ones, German shepherds mostly. We had one in our building back on Earth that barked every time I walked past its door. He exhaled, letting the silence fill in. Wasn't until I spent time at my cousin's place one summer he had this lazy retriever who wouldn't even chase a stick. Just sat beside me for hours while I read. That's when it stopped being scary. The cub leaned its head against his shoulder. He didn't move. Didn't even breathe. Eventually, it drifted into a nap right there. Massive head tilted awkwardly against his arm. When he finally did exhale, it felt like something uncoiled inside him too. That night, someone attempted to breach the habitat. The alarms triggered at 2:14 local time. Daniel woke instantly, the cub already crouched between him and the door. By the time security arrived, the lock was damaged and the external panel sparking. The attacker never seen, gone before the cameras adjusted. They left behind a message, burned into the panel casing. "It's a weapon, not a pet." Command locked down the plateau. Daniel was relocated temporarily to a secure zone deeper in the ridge. The cub went with him. He didn't sleep again for 3 days. On the 15th day of the observation period, Daniel was summoned to a formal command hearing. Attendance was optional, but everyone came. He entered with the cub walking beside him, tethered only by his presence. No leash. No control collar. It stayed close, head low, eyes watching everyone. No one spoke as they took their seats. Admiral Ferres, head of the Zerkesh 9 Command, sat at the central dais, his face unreadable. "Cadet Hayes," he began, "this meeting concerns your ongoing assignment, the stability of our training program, and the political fallout now tied to your situation." Daniel straightened as best he could. His back still ached from the cot's thin support beam. Ferris tapped a tablet. After reviewing all psychological assessments, interspecies behavior logs, and first-hand accounts, the following conclusion has been reached. A pause. Commander Jural's training practices have been deemed unethical and in violation of Accord interpersonal conduct codes. His case will proceed to tribunal. A murmur spread through the room. Ferris raised his hand. In addition, the cub officially designated Asset R7 is no longer classified as a training subject. It will be treated as an at-risk juvenile under protection protocol until further notice. He looked at Daniel now, direct. "And Cadet Hayes, you are to remain as its guardian." The silence was louder this time. "Not because of sentiment," Ferris said, "but because you are the only individual it has accepted proximity from without stress response." Daniel swallowed. "What happens if that changes?" Ferris looked down. "Then we reconsider everything." That night, Daniel found the cub curled up near the cot again. He sat beside it, hands on his knees. "You're not broken, you know," he said softly. The cub lifted its head. "You're not what he made you. You don't have to be what he told you to become." It blinked, then pressed its head into his chest. And for the first time since the day it shattered its abuser's jaw, it made a noise that wasn't a growl or a cry. It purred. Rough, uneven, but unmistakably a purr. By the 3rd week, the cub had a name. Unofficial, of course. Not approved by any panel, and certainly not by the Torcathi delegation, what was left of it. Daniel had started using it quietly, mostly when they were alone, like when the cub skulked too close to the hot plate again or shoved its snout into his pack and scattered his neatly rationed supplies across the floor. "Soren," Daniel had muttered once, brushing scraps into a bag. "You can tear my nerves to ribbons, but if you knock over one more water pack, I swear." The cub had paused, ears perked, and then nudged the pack upright again. After that, the name stuck. Not everyone approved, but Daniel used it anyway. Because every time he said it, the cub looked up, not with fear, with recognition. Soren's progress was slow, even by generous standards. It remained hyper-alert around large groups and flinched at unexpected sounds. But it no longer panicked at footsteps outside the quarters. It no longer growled at the security staff. Once, when a medic reached too quickly with a scanner, Soren bared its teeth, but instead of lunging, it backed away and bumped into Daniel's side, pressing its flank there like a living shield. That reaction, a choice to retreat, meant more than anything. Small victories, stacked on each other. Still, not everyone saw it that way. On day 24, a diplomatic envoy arrived from the Torcathi homeworld. A full delegation, robes sharp as bone cutters, voices soft with the kind of authority that only ever gave orders behind closed doors. They requested an audience with Daniel. Formally. He was brought to one of the clean rooms in the upper compound. No weapons allowed, not even utility tools. Just him. And a half-circle of very tired, very controlled officials, who looked like they wanted this resolved before their travel rations went stale. "You've interfered in internal Torcathi training affairs," one of them said, without preamble, "a matter outside your species' jurisdiction." Daniel didn't respond. Not yet. Another spoke, this one with gray stripes down his jaw, a sign of seniority. "You believe your empathy has corrected a centuries-honed method." "I didn't correct anything," Daniel said quietly. "I just didn't hurt it." The cub is no longer fit for integration. It disobeyed under pressure. It hesitated in aggression. Do you know what that means for its caste? Daniel met his eyes now. Yes, it means it's thinking. The Torcathi's brow lifted a millimeter. You misunderstand the purpose of our traditions, Cadet Hayes. No, I think I understand them too well, Daniel said. A beat of silence. Then the eldest of the delegation folded his hands. We request the cub's return. It wasn't a demand. It wasn't yet. Daniel's hands curled in his lap. If it wants to go, it can go. You will not force it to stay? No, he said, but I won't force it to leave either. That evening, under the thin artificial sunset of Zarkesh 9, Daniel opened the door to the outer enclosure. Soren stood at his side. Beyond the fence, a full Torcathi cruiser, open hatch, delegation waiting. Soren stared, then looked at Daniel, and sat down. Didn't move. Didn't tremble. Just sat. The cruiser waited another 7 minutes before lifting off without a word. The incident sparked more than ripples. It launched a slow, tectonic shift. Within days, debate halls across the Accord lit up with new discussions about juvenile combat imprinting, interspecies trauma response, and the question no one had wanted to ask. If fear-based conditioning could be unlearned, what did that mean for every system still using it? The Accord Ethics Commission issued a review order for every combat academy that hosted Torcathi youth. Other species followed. Reform advocates took the floor. Resistance, of course, was immediate. But something had changed, visibly, undeniably. It had a name now, and it chose not to leave. Daniel's reassignment came quietly. After his final evaluation, his medical record was marked for post-trauma rehabilitation. His hip was healing slowly but steadily. The nerve impingement had resolved, though muscle weakness persisted. He walked better now, still with a slight limp, especially when tired, but his strength was returning. A permanent leave from field training was offered. He declined. Instead, he accepted a new post. Instructor's aide. Ethics and interspecies trauma recovery. Not on Zarkesh 9. On Earth. He packed in silence. Soren circled the room once, then planted himself in the doorway. When Daniel slung his pack over one shoulder and looked back, the cub made a soft, chuffing sound, not distress. Something closer to a question. You're coming, Daniel said simply. Soren rose, walked beside him. Didn't look back. 2 months later, they stood at the edge of a fenced reserve in the mountains north of Taos. The air was clean, sharp with pine. The training compound behind them had been quiet all morning, cadets off on their assignments. Soren lay stretched beside Daniel's chair, eyes half closed in the sunday. He was bigger now, still growing. The fur near his back legs had filled out again, no more tremors in his sleep. He no longer followed Daniel with the same relentless fixation. He came when called, rested when told. But he always slept near the door, always facing it. One of the new cadets, a young woman from the Drast Confederacy, approached quietly with a data tablet clutched in her claws. She didn't step closer than 10 feet. Is it true? She asked. That it broke its instructor's jaw? Daniel glanced down at Soren. The cub yawned, rolled to its side. Yeah, Daniel said, but that's not the important part. The cadet hesitated. Then, what is? Daniel looked back out across the tree line. It sat in someone's lap after. That night, after the lights dimmed and the reserve fell quiet, Daniel sat on the porch of the instructor's lodge, hot tea in hand. Soren padded up behind him, nudged his elbow, then dropped onto the ground with a grunt. For a while, neither of them moved. Then Daniel spoke, softly. You're not a lesson, he murmured. Not a weapon, not a project. He reached down, placed a hand lightly against Soren's neck. You're just free. Soren's breathing slowed.